Good evening. Thank you so much for joining Able South Carolina and our third quarterly Disability Pride Town Hall session, followed by our first Disabled and Allies training. My name is Mary Alex Kopp. I'm the Vice President and Chief Public Relations Officer here at Able South Carolina. On the screen right now, we've got a quick plug for our Advocacy Day for Access and Independence that is scheduled for April 14th of this year. That is co-hosted between us and the South Carolina Action and Independence Network, Access and Independence Network, excuse me. And we're just going to jump right in. If we can go to the next slide, please. So a couple of notes. First thing, Zoom rules and how to ask questions. Your microphone will remain muted until the end of the presentation. After our presentations, we will answer your questions. You are welcome to use the question and answer feature or the Q&A feature to send your questions throughout the presentation. You can also ask to be unmuted to ask your questions directly to the presenters. It is a really great idea to write your questions down as you think of them. So if you'd like to do this, go ahead and get something to write on now before we get started, or you can simply use the question and answer feature and we will check there. Also, for those of you who are interested, we do have ASL interpretation and captioning. You can access ASL interpretation by using the interpretation selection window at the bottom of your screen, as well as the option to select whether your captions are on or off. If you have any trouble with using the ASL interpretation window or captioning or any other technical issues, feel free to notify us in the chat. We have a couple of members of our team who are watching and handling technical assistance tonight. Next slide, please. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to ask that tonight's speakers introduce themselves one at a time. They're going to be presenting in this first hour about issue areas and topics directly impacting people with disabilities. And then in our second hour, we will be doing our Disabled and Allies training, talking about ways to get you to engage with your lawmakers. So I will pass it over to Larry.
Hey everyone, good evening. I'm glad to see so many folks with us. I'm Larry Wenger. I'm the Vice President and Chief Advocacy and Independent Living Officer here with Able South Carolina. Glad to be with you this evening.
Hey everyone, I'm so happy to see all of you. I am Kimberly Tiso, the President and CEO of Able South Carolina, and we are very excited about tonight. And I am a middle-aged woman with dark blonde hair that's to my shoulders, and I'm wearing glasses and a plaid shirt today.
Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here and see everybody that's joined. My name is Allie Springate. I'm the Director of Advocacy here at Able South Carolina, and I work up in the Greenville office. I'm a white woman with glasses and brown wavy hair about past my shoulders, and I'm wearing a black turtleneck today. If we can go to the next slide. So very quickly to set us off and kind of establish a framework for the rest of our presentation this evening, I wanted to touch on what disability advocacy is. So for those relatively unfamiliar, or even if you are very familiar with this term, as a reminder, we take action to create equal rights, access, and opportunity for all people with disabilities. Disability advocacy really addresses policies and laws that impact disability. And we believe that those policies and laws should be influenced by people with disabilities. Our advocacy says no to ableism in systems, and those systems include healthcare, education, employment, housing, voting, etc. One thing to keep in mind as we proceed throughout this presentation and all of our presentations, all of the work that we do here at ABLE, is that we are strictly nonpartisan. And what that means is that ABLE South Carolina does not take sides with any political group. And this is, it's important to remember that not only this event is nonpartisan, but everything we do at ABLE is nonpartisan. But it's important to distinguish that we advocate for change that benefits disabled people, not specific political candidates or groups. We call out all leaders, when policies harm disabled people. It doesn't matter what side of the political aisle they are on. Next slide, please. A quick run through of the topics that we'll discuss today. Today, we're going to talk about the Texas versus Kennedy update that has to do with the Section 504 lawsuit. We'll talk about Affordable Care Act updates. We'll talk about continuing resolution for the federal budget, and that includes housing, Department of Housing funding, so HUD funding. We'll talk about Rural Health Transformation Program and what that means. We'll also go over some state Medicaid updates. We're going to look at a few South Carolina specific bills, including an accessible parking bill, a voter registration bill, the Student Physical Privacy Act, and the Infant Safe Haven Placement. And then the second half of our training today, our presentation today, is our Disabled and Allies training. Next slide, please. So we're going to start with federal updates. And let's go to the next slide.
All right, so that's me again. This is Larry, and I apologize. I forgot to give a description of myself for those who might need that. I'm a white male with gray-brown hair, wearing a black polo shirt. I'm sitting in my home office, but my background is gray, so I don't believe you can see any of that behind me, but nice bookshelves. Anyway, we'll go ahead and get started with what's happening on the federal level, and there's, as usual, quite a bit going on. We're going to start with an update on Texas versus Kennedy, and this is the 504 situation that's been going on for the past year or so. Just background, what is Section 504? It's a civil rights law that basically says that people with disabilities can't be discriminated against by programs that receive federal funding. So that could include a number of things. It could include schools, public schools especially, hospitals and clinics, government programs, public transportation, job training programs, and some housing. So really, it boils down to programs and entities that receive federal funding are held to 504. So why should you care about it? In short, 504 says that if you have a disability, you have a right to access programs and services, and that you can't be discriminated against because of your disability. Places are also required to make reasonable accommodation that include you and give you access. And information must be accessible. So, for example, that might mean alternative formats, providing interpreters, ASL interpreters, etc. And buildings and services must be physically accessible wherever possible. Anyone with a physical disability, or the definition in the law says, in terms of who is protected, anyone with a mental or physical disability that significantly impacts one or more life activities. You can see on the screen there. So, that is a pretty broad definition, for sure. Important to note that you don't have to receive Social Security disability benefits to be protected. Many more people beyond those who receive Social Security are protected. So on slide 10 here, let's talk more about the case itself. It's a lawsuit that was brought by the state of Texas and other states in 2025, I believe, is when it began. And it's filed against the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The lawsuit is trying to block or undo certain parts of updated 504 rules. And they're really stressing the parts of the Rehab Act that mandate people with disabilities receiving services and being able to live in the in the community instead of institutions. So many of you today will be familiar with the Olmstead decision, which was a case that came before the Supreme Court back in the late 90s. And the court ruled that people with disabilities have a right to live in the least restrictive setting. And this is what the states are fighting. The lawsuit is trying to say that institutionalization is not discrimination, and the federal government doesn't have the right to enforce community integration, that the federal government can't enforce that. So 504 and Olmstead work together. They're essentially, as I said about 504, it requires access to government programs and services, and Olmstead goes further and says that people with disabilities have the right to live in the community. So, again, just on explaining Olmstead further, home and community-based services exist because of that decision. People can challenge unnecessary nursing home and institutional placement. And disability rights are treated like civil rights. Federal agencies are also able to hold states accountable because of the Olmstead decision. Before Olmstead, 504 said no discrimination, but states claimed institutionalizing people and placing them in restrictive settings was not discrimination. Segregation, it was essentially segregation of people with disabilities, and the states claim that's just how things worked, more or less. And this case came before the Supreme Court to argue that concept, and the decision by the court completely changed that. So again, the court said unnecessary segregation of people with disabilities is not allowed. That was essentially their decision. So we want to kind of move forward here and talk about the current status of the case and what's happened now. So first of all, a big congratulations to those who got involved in this issue when we first brought it forward about a year ago. You'll recall that South Carolina was a party to this lawsuit, among other states. In response to advocacy, people signing on to letters opposing our involvement as a state in this case and stressing the consequences that potentially could result if a decision were made to overturn 504 and the community living mandate. Because of that advocacy, our state is no longer party to this case. So we've removed ourselves from it, or our attorney general has removed the state from it. Unfortunately, while our state has removed itself from this case, 9 other states remain actively involved in the case. And just last week, they reaffirmed their position that they believe the federal government does not have the right to enforce 504 and in turn Olmstead and the community living mandate. So those states you see listed on your screen there, Texas, Alaska, Florida, Alabama, Indiana, Kansas, Missouri, Montana, and South Dakota have continued in the case and continue to fight that. You see there a link to Disability Rights and Education Defense Fund website. DREDF is what we call them for short. And they have a lot of information on their website about this case. You can also, if you don't see that address or need the link, feel free to, maybe someone can drop it in the chat or just leave a note that you need it, or contact us and we'll be happy to connect you to DREDF and get you that information. This is a really important case. Obviously, our position is that people with disabilities must be included and have the right to live in the community. And we're very concerned about this case and what might happen. So just because South Carolina has removed itself from this case does not resolve the situation. So we're going to move on to slide 13 here and talk about the Affordable Care Act, our next issue. Um, so let's see here. So sometimes this is called Obamacare, right? And we've talked about this in previous town halls, but we want to keep you updated on what's happened. Um, the Affordable Care Act passed in 2010, and the general goal of the law was to make health insurance and healthcare more affordable for Americans. Um, my computer's having a meltdown here. Sorry. It provides financial assistance. There are subsidies that were part of the act to help people pay for healthcare. Um, basically making it more affordable. So what's happening now? So we'll continue to the next slide here. So the long story short here, because I know we're trying to kind of keep moving because of time here. The long story short is a couple of years ago during the pandemic, Congress passed a law that provided subsidies over and above what were included in the ACA. Those subsidies expired at the end of last year. And so you heard us, we talked about it, and you heard elsewhere, no doubt, about the significantly higher premiums that some folks were having to pay for coverage due to the expiration of the subsidies. And so letters went out back in December, letting folks know what their premium would be and what their options are. And also provided open enrollment continued until January 15th, and that has closed. So most people have made decisions about their coverage. I certainly have heard a number of people in various places mention that they either had to make decisions to let go of their and no longer have health insurance because they couldn't afford it, which no doubt many people had to make. The increases were significant. Or that they've had to make, financial decisions elsewhere to reduce expenses to be able to afford healthcare. So the Congress is obviously concerned about this. It's an election year. Nobody wants to be, quote unquote, responsible for people having to pass on insurance and all of those things anytime, but especially in an election year. So the House and Senate have begun to work toward addressing this. The Senate has a bill pending. So the House passed a bill with one proposal, and the Senate has another proposal that's a little bit different. And so that has been put on hold in terms of being addressed because of another issue that we'll talk about in just a moment. But no doubt they will circle back to this issue, and much more will be done, we hope. This is a real important issue. There's a pretty good percentage of folks in South Carolina that were receiving subsidies under the Affordable Care Act. Upwards of 90% of people in South Carolina who had ACA plans also were receiving subsidies. So this is certainly an issue of importance to our state. So the proposals in the Senate include the possibility of extending subsidies for 2 years, or allowing funds that would otherwise go into health savings account to help people pay for healthcare. So there's some different options floating around. On slide 19 here. So the impact in South Carolina, really quickly. Many low-income folks in our state just don't qualify for Medicaid, so they were getting healthcare through the Affordable Care Act plans. We have over 500,000, nearly 600,000 people in our state who were receiving or who were participating in ACA plans. And as I said earlier, upwards of 90% of those folks were using a subsidy. So it's a huge issue for our state. So now we'll move to slide 20 and talk about the continuing resolution. So as you may have heard, the federal government is currently in a partial shutdown, and there are various programs impacted or departments impacted by the shutdown. And we'll talk about that. But again, a continuing resolution, basically every year the federal government is required to pass a budget and spending bills that talk essentially outline where funds are going to go. You'll recall that we had the shutdown in October and November because resolution was not reached, but eventually things moved forward and they passed what's called a continuing resolution to fund the government through January 31st. And so, as you know, that date has come and gone. And while a deal was reached to continue the government operations in many departments, some have been affected, primarily Department of Homeland Security, but also impacts on HUD and Health and Human Services and other departments. If lawmakers don't resolve this, it will continue. But right now, there's a 2-week window in there where they're working to reach agreement on these issues. So right now, kind of to cut to the chase here, presently, today is a big day. The Senate, over the weekend, I believe actually on Friday evening, passed a package of bills to resolve things. It's pending in the House. And the House Rules Committee, which is a committee that decides how things are going to move and proceed, either has or is voting, and things would continue to move forward this evening even. And we'll see where it goes. The House is obviously very tight in terms of representation, so it only takes a few people to vote one way or another for things to be impacted. So this is something to watch as we go forward. But again, when we think about impacts to people with disabilities, right now there's some impact on housing and urban development, or what we call HUD, and then Health and Human Services, which a number of disability programs are in that department.
Your default speaker has changed. IMAX speakers and will. Your default speaker.
Okay. Sorry about that. My computer is not cooperating. Give me 30 seconds, 20 seconds here. Okay. So we'll kind of continue moving forward. You see, before we move on with from the CR, you see a list of programs that are affected there, and I kind of highlighted that. 2-week extension is in place, and we'll keep watching to see what happens here. We want to talk about HUD. So on slide 25, housing and urban development is obviously a department that oversees a number of housing programs such as Section 8 and vouchers and a number of other programs that impact people with disabilities. So right now, the federal budget, including HUD, is still being reviewed in Congress. There is a proposal in that budget that's pending being voted on. There's a proposal to increase HUD funding over and above what it was set at last year. So from 70 billion last year to 77 billion and change this year, which is good news. Additional funding for housing programs is always good news in terms of the need we see in the community and how many calls and requests for support with housing that we see. Um, there's a couple of there are certain programs that appear to be slated for funding increases if it were to pass. One of those is tenant-based rental assistant contracts. This is inclusive of the Housing Choice Voucher Program, which is important. New tenant protection vouchers and homeless assistance grant programs and continuum of care renewals, which are really important to communities across the country, providing support for folks who are unhoused. So there are 26 programs in total that would be impacted. So again, there's some description here about housing choice vouchers in Section 8. As I mentioned, they help low-income folks, seniors, and people with disabilities to find housing. Obviously, when these aren't funded, or if there aren't enough vouchers available, families are at risk of losing housing or having difficulty finding housing and losing rental assistance. Emergency housing vouchers. These are important to folks who are unhoused or who are survivors of domestic violence as well. And obviously, if the vouchers aren't fully funded, there's just not enough housing opportunities for folks, and it has a pretty big impact on the community. Homeless and community development grants. These are grants for homeless prevention, supportive housing, and community development. And then there's other programs here as well that benefit from funding or would be impacted. I won't. So why does all of this matter for people with disabilities? Obviously, Section 8 and other HUD programs greatly assist people with disabilities. They're really critical because they make housing affordable, give access to accessible units, and allow people to live independently instead of in institutions. And then, obviously, if cuts were to result, we would see even longer waiting lists, fewer vouchers, fewer available units, and less support for accessible or adaptive housing. So this is really important to our community and those of us with disabilities. We know, according to studies, that people with disabilities are overrepresented among those experiencing homelessness. Over 50% of folks around 50% or more of people with disabilities who are experiencing homelessness have a physical, mental, or other type of disability. So it's definitely overrepresented. So I think that's it. And we'll transition, I believe, back to Allie.
Yes. Hello again. Just as a quick reminder, please use the Q&A feature of Zoom and the chat to ask questions. We are flying through content, obviously trying to take as much time as we can to talk about really important updates, but this is really dense technical language that we're using. So we totally understand that it can often be very confusing and overwhelming. So please feel free to ask questions. And if you can't think of any now, you always can email us if you have any questions. But I just wanted to do a midway reminder to be interactive in the chat as much as you would like. You're free to do that. So we're going to move on, and I'm going to talk about a new program that was a response to what we talked about in July. The big, beautiful bill, quote unquote, is its name, and it has other titles as well. But an act that was passed that resulted in a lot of cuts to funding. So the Rural Health Transformation Program was one such response to healthcare funding cuts. And it is a $50 billion program that was created under the Working Families Tax Cuts Act, also sometimes referred to as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Its goal was to strengthen and transform rural health care in all 50 states, over the next 10 years. So from now to 2030. The whole program is going to cost a total of $50 billion. $10 billion will be released each year from 2026, so this year, through 2030. Half of the funding is split equally among all approved states. The other half is given out based on state-specific data. So like South Carolina, for instance, we're a very rural state, but our size differs from other rural states. So funding will be different from state to state. So let's go on to the next slide. And if you don't remember anything, leave here with this. This program is a response, like I said, to the tax cuts, the Medicaid tax cuts in the One Big Beautiful Bill, or HR 1 is another word for it as well. That cut more than $1 trillion from the federal budget, including those deep cuts to Medicaid. And we provided information back in July on this, and you can go back to that recording if you happen to register or ask us and we can send that to you. Please note that $50 billion is far less than $1 trillion. So we talked all about in July how we're actually very underfunded in our state for healthcare. And this Rural Health Transformation Program, while a positive thing, does not at all address the massive gap in healthcare that we have. And that's because many rural hospitals and health providers are already running on very tight budgets, and any cuts put them at even more of a risk of losing services, laying off staff, shutting down entirely, etc. Let's go on to the next slide. Some information that is specific to South Carolina. We were given through this program about $200 million for 2026. But experts believe that South Carolina could lose up to $5 billion over the next 10 years because of the impact of the cuts to Medicaid from back in July when that act was passed. And that's information that we can give you. We have some resources that would be really helpful for extra reading if you're interested in that. And the South Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, DHHS, is the agency in charge of administering that funding. The money will go toward updating technology, communication between healthcare providers, helping to retain employees and recruit new employees, and investing in healthcare services. But again, it's important to keep in mind that this really does not address the root of the problem. Let's go on to the next slide. This program, like I said, is not going to fully replace the money lost from Medicaid cuts over the long term, especially after the next 10 years, so after 2030. I've already talked about the $5 billion that will be lost, or up to $5 billion. Much of that money is not guaranteed to keep rural hospitals open. It's a fraction of what our state actually needs to increase access to health care. So from a disability rights perspective, this matters because without consistent long-term funding, providers in our state in rural areas may still close or reduce services. People with disabilities can face new barriers to access, even more than the barriers that are already there, especially for behavioral health, folks with chronic care needs, rehabilitation, long-term supports. So we don't say this to be doom and gloom or to scare. We say this because advocacy is ongoing, and we need to use our voice to lead these initiatives to make sure that our state is asking for the funding that it needs and addressing the problems that are there due to funding and lack of funding. So let's go on to the next slide. And I believe that, nope, not yet. I'm so sorry. What are we doing? What are we doing about it? So as a disability rights advocacy organization, we are closely monitoring how South Carolina plans to spend this money. We have close partnerships with folks at DHHS, and we're in constant conversations about how disability access and equity are built in from the start, and we're able to lend our expertise in that way because we understand firsthand how behind our state is on providing equitable and accessible health care. And we'll continue to center disabled voices because that's our mission, those are our values, especially those from rural areas in advocacy and education about access to healthcare services. Next slide, please. Perfect. So we're going to go on to some state updates. And I'm going to provide our first state update, which is a state Medicaid update. So let's skip the next two slides. Perfect, that one. Pretty heavy slide. So again, use that Q&A feature. Make sure you're writing down questions that you might want to ask at the end. But all of this is very dense, so feel free to connect with us afterward to have more conversations about it. So the South Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, often referred to as DHHS, asked our state legislature for a little over $47 million in new general funds as a part of its 2026 budget request. This is specifically to support home and community-based service programs. And we've talked a lot about home and community-based services in the past. And Larry already talked a lot about it through discussing Olmstead and what Olmstead is and what the Section 504 lawsuit, Texas v. Kennedy, attacks. So as we've talked about before, Medicaid is deeply underfunded in South Carolina. We have been an underfunded and fragile home and community-based service system for years. Too many people still believe that home and community-based services are optional, when actually they are a right. They're a civil right. So for years, home and community-based services has been framed as a nice benefit or a Medicaid option, and not what it should be, which is a civil rights obligation, something to mandate anti-segregation. So instead of separating people into different living spaces, everyone lives in the community and receives services in the community. And it is a requirement under the ADA and Section 504. Because of that option type framing, it's allowed lawmakers to say, well, we can't afford it, or we'll get to it later, or institutions are still available. And we talk a lot about this every advocacy day and every year with our issue areas, but it's important for you to know as well that home and community-based services actually cost a lot less than institutional care. And based on current data, home and community-based services cost about half per person the amount that it would cost our state to send someone to an institution. So it just makes sense to put a lot of funding in home and community-based services. So we're encouraged that our state is seeking funding to bolster home and community-based services, but there is still a need, and we're very behind on funding these services. So it's important to keep advocating for more funding. Let's go on to the next slide. I believe I'll transition to Kimberly to talk about the accessible parking bill.
Hey everyone, we're going to talk about parking. So, South Carolina has a Senate Bill 748 and also a House Bill 4768 that would allow the DMV to issue placards and accessible placards to people who are pregnant. And so, this bill would allow pregnant people to actually park in the ADA accessible parking. So even if they don't meet the current criteria. Now, currently, right now, pregnant people can actually go and get a temporary ADA parking placard if their pregnancy is resulting in one or more major life activities and impacting. So right now it is very easy to do, but a lot of people are not educated. This is a well-intentioned bill, but it's one that is very much off the mark because there are currently over 300,000 people in South Carolina that require ADA parking. And so that looks like 134,000, over 143,000 people have the placard that you hang in the window. 105, over 105,000 people have the permanent placards. And then 22,000 are disabled veterans, so they are allowed to also park in the ADA parking spots. And a little bit over 24,000 people you have temporary parking spots. So that's if maybe they've had surgery or they are allowed to also use that if they are pregnant and they have limitations. What this bill is wanting to do, and this is the impact on the disability community, they're wanting to take parking spots that we already don't have enough of. There is no enforcement on ADA parking right now in South Carolina. You can park in a parking spot and you're not getting a ticket, and that is only hurting people with disabilities. So we have been meeting with Senator Ott and Representative Caskey, educating them about the concerns of this bill, and hopefully they will be issuing another bill coming with all of the fixes that we're recommending. But just real quick, ADA parking is a civil rights. It's not a convenience. A lot of people think it's just a blue parking spot with a sign. It is way more than that. It allows people with disabilities to go in and out of establishments on their own where they might not have a lot of walking a distance, or they're using their wheelchair and need to actually operate a lift. And so the ADA spots are actually measured according to ADA standards. And so people who are pregnant can really essentially park at any parking space, and so do not require the ADA parking spots. We are also, and if you hear me, I am not saying handicap parking. Actually, it is not called handicap parking. That is a very outdated word, but it is called accessible parking, is what it should be. And so that's something that we are also educating the state on. Um, it also dramatically increases the demand and supply if we did allow people who are pregnant to park in these spots. There's not a lot of parking to meet the needs of both people with disabilities and pregnant and people who are pregnant. And then disabled South Carolinians are getting pushed out again. And this is something that we all have to do a good job at standing up to. We cannot let anybody take our parking. That is legally, and that's our civil right to have. And there's, again, that standard to that measurement of that parking spot. And there's way better solutions that we're talking about with the lawmakers. And so hopefully that will come out. But right now we are fighting very, very hard not to allow them to make it a law where pregnant people can park in the accessible spot. And Mary Alex just added a fact sheet as well in the notes section, and you will see our fact sheet about all of the issue areas around being around parking and accessible spots. So feel free to read it. If you have any questions, you can always contact us. We're always willing to connect you with lawmakers, and you can tell your story to lawmakers as well. If this bill does get scary and if it does go to committee and it looks like it may be moving forward, we will be doing a lot of action alerts to get people mobilized so that we can stop this bill from passing. We will go to the next slide. So again, the current status, it's just been introduced. So that is the current status. It's not, it's been assigned to a subcommittee, and that's a transportation subcommittee for review. But we plan on not letting it move very far because Senator Ott will be hopefully introducing a new bill in the coming weeks. All right, we will skip this. All right, and I will pass it back to Allie.
Hello again. So I'm going to provide a brief update on another new bill, the Voter Registration Act. So let's go ahead and go on. Thank you. So S-128 is a voter registration bill that would change state law so that people must provide more evidence of U.S. citizenship in order to register to vote in South Carolina. And the language of this bill defines what documentation county voter registration boards would consider as proof of citizenship, like a U.S. passport, birth certificate, or other forms of citizenship proof. It allows the Attorney General as well to review existing registration rolls to make sure rules are being followed. So let's go on to the next slide. Perfect. Obviously, as pertaining to folks with disabilities, this bill creates extra barriers to registering to vote. Many folks with disabilities don't have easy access to original documents like birth certificates or passports, and they might need help traveling, paying fees, or navigating these agencies to get these documents. And we all know the DMV goes so quickly. We often rely on assistive supports that aren't always accommodated in government offices. So this turns voter registration into a multi-step process rather than just a simple form. So creating excess barriers to access. Let's go on to the next slide. Some other concerns as well. Disabled folks are likely to be more negatively impacted than other groups. People more likely to be affected include individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities, folks with psychiatric disabilities, people who live in poverty or institutional settings, disabled people who rely on caregivers or representative payees. And these groups are more likely to have documents that are controlled by others or overseen by others, or have lost paperwork over time. Many folks face challenges advocating for themselves in these kinds of systems, especially systems that are not very accommodating. Let's go on to the next slide. Thank you. So again, also another new bill, a hearing was held in the Senate Judiciary Committee where members discussed the bill and they kept it for further review. Senator Thompson is reportedly considering minor amendments to address some potential constitutional issues before moving forward. So it's active, but waiting in committee. Hasn't been moved forward to the full Senate or moved to the House yet. So like with everything else, we'll keep folks updated and you'll be hearing updates as we get them. Let's go on to the next slide. Voting access is protected by the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's protected by the Voting Rights Act. It's protected by these federal protections that require equal access and reasonable accommodations. And we are very rooted in that work and partnering with other agencies who are also very rooted in this work. So there's constant advocacy being done and coalitions that are meeting to discuss advocacy for these types of things, including this type of bill. So policies that add complexity without strong accessibility safeguards risk keeping disabled people from voting. And that's why it's incredibly important to be participating in advocacy, because it directly impacts disabled folks. Next slide, please. And I'll transfer to Kimberly.
All right, so we're going to talk about H4756, the Student Physical Privacy Act. And while this is not a disability rights bill, like all bills, it does impact people with disabilities. So we're going to talk about this. So what is House Bill 4756? So it requires public restrooms and changing rooms to be used only by members of one sex as defined by biological sex at birth. And so there's a lot of issues concerning this for the disability community, but it would apply to multi-stall restrooms, locker rooms, shower rooms, and shared sleeping quarters within K to 12. It also gives people a private right of action. So private right of action is a student or employee could sue a school district or institution if the rule isn't being followed. So they could actually be sued, which is a significant issue. It defines sex strictly in biological terms, so male and female, allows exceptions only for maintenance, medical needs, and emergencies. And so this bill was introduced earlier this month, and it has already passed in the House. So it has not yet become law, but it has to go through the Senate. And so this is moving relatively quickly. We'll go to the next slide. And part of the bill, there is an area in its section F of the bill that does talk about accommodating disabled students and young adult and young children who need physical help in the bathrooms. It is a very vague statement that does not include enough information. And there's a very similar bill that passed in or is being introduced in Kansas. And they've already started experiencing issues where people who are helping someone in the bathroom are already getting called out and getting removed. And so, what this will look like is it will remove assistance around any kind of personal care. So, if someone needs assistance in a bathroom, if someone needs assistance getting dressed. But the language does limit trans disabled students, trans personal care attendants, and trans staff members from using these spaces. Students who need personal assistance in these spaces may still encounter barriers and are specific policies in place. Enforcement through civil lawsuit is a huge burden on individuals, especially when somebody is just needing some assistance in the bathroom and they're unable to get it because the individual is of the opposite sex. And so while we like the status of that section F in the bill, it is very, very vague. And honestly, a lot of people in our state do not even understand Section 504 or the Americans with Disabilities Act, so we don't think that they will understand that part, the Section F in this bill. Go to the next slide. So what this will do is it will, and this bill is only sex segregated by facilities and strict entry rules. So it will create barriers to access to care at personal care attendants, force students to choose between privacy and necessary support, and then put pressure on the schools to make subjective decisions who will need help and who will not. And we're very worried about that because it would really allow it to be interpreted by the schools. So there could be different language throughout different schools, but also I think it would really put some strain on an individual to be fearful of even having somebody go into the bathroom to provide that personal assistance. So next slide. And we're going to talk about another bill that is not strictly a disability rights bill, but it is House Bill 4696, and it's the Infant Safe Haven Placement. This bill is right now, it's where a parent can surrender a baby at a safe haven if the baby is less than 60 days old. So surrender means giving up your baby and putting it in a place for someone to come care for it. And so usually the child goes into protective custody, DSS, and put into foster care. The bill that is being proposed would actually raise the age of the child to 1 year old. And that will indirectly have some impact on the disability community. And you're probably like, why? We'll go to the next slide. Well, why? Parents and infants with newly discovered disabilities usually find out around that age. And so we're very concerned, and there's been talk around the State House that this would allow people to identify if their baby does have a disability, and it gives them the opportunity to surrender their rights. We have a huge issue with that because people with disabilities, their lives are worth living. But what we really need is we need services in South Carolina. We don't need families to relinquish their rights because South Carolina is lacking services. And so that should not even be put on the table. So we're very concerned about this 1 year change. And so we are providing a lot of information around this, and they are really listening to us right now. So we're hopefully that we'll be able to stop this bill as well. So we'll go to the next slide. And then I do want to just talk about one bill that is not actually on here, but it is a bill that would allow special education to have cameras in the special education classrooms. Obviously, we all know that there has been abuse and neglect in these classrooms, and it's hard to be able to show proof. While we understand that this is a bill that has good intentions, it could also cause a lot of issues. So there's obviously privacy risks. There's misuse and misinterpretation, public records. But I will say this, and I'll say this a million times throughout my lifetime. Special education is a service. It is not a place. So if they're going to put cameras in special education classes, they should also be in general ed classes because children are not segregated to one classroom all day. And so there's got to be some fair pieces here. But also, it's not equal, and it could cause ADA violations in practice if it is implemented poorly. And so it would have unequal impacts, so discrimination, and only looking at students with disabilities, there'd be a failure to accommodate hostile or intimidating environments and privacy tied to access. And so while the ADA isn't a privacy law, exposing disability-related information through recordings can still interfere with equal participation and access, triggering ADA concerns. And so, what we are going to suggest instead is we need to invest in school. We need to have more aides in the classroom. This is just a Band-Aid, this camera, and it would probably not tell us very much because again, children with disabilities are not isolated in one classroom. They are throughout the school. So we will keep an eye out on this bill. We are doing a lot of advocacy to hopefully come to a win-win solution where we're looking at the abuse that students with disabilities encounter within the schools, but we're also going to look for solutions and one that is throughout the school setting.
All right,
All
so
right.
before we get to a few questions, I wanted to take a minute to just address the amount of information that we're covering. So let's go to the next slide real quick. We know that there's so much going on in the world. Everywhere you turn, there's another headline, there's something else to be advocating for or to be informed about. So since there's so many topics and headlines that are vying for our attention, that are trying to grab at our attention, we know that things can quickly get overwhelming. So we wanted to just make a statement about how we understand that, but also we have to be very focused on disability related topics and the impact of policies on disabled folks in South Carolina. However, we really highly recommend connecting with organizations who can provide really good information about these other topics outside of disability advocacy, or adjacent to disability advocacy, I should say, in the news. So if you would like some support with finding organizations to connect with and to hear from, please reach out to us. Our general email is info@able-sc.org, but later on in the presentation, you'll be able to get a contact slide with more specific and direct information, folks to directly reach out to. And I'm going to turn things over to Mary Alex.
Okay, thank you guys so much. So we are at the end of the first portion of our presentation, and I know we've got several questions. So we're going to work to address those now. I'm going to help facilitate those questions. Let's see here. So the first, we had a question in our Q&A. How much is South Carolina currently paying for in home and community-based services? If one of our presenters can answer that, please.
Hey, I'll jump in and answer. So we put this data in last year's issue area booklet for Advocacy Day, but generally it's around $100,000 per person for institutional care. So staying at a facility, paying for someone to stay at a facility, but it's about 46,000 to 50,000 per person to have them served in the community for home and community-based services. So it's about half the cost for someone to be using home and community-based services in our state. That's a good question.
Awesome. Thank you. The next question we had was about institutional lobby, if somebody might be benefiting from the status quo. I'm not sure if that is a question that we're able to answer, or if maybe there could be some clarification.
And again, Mac, let me know if you want me to unmute anybody.
Hey, Matt.
Alrighty.
Hey, Matt.
Mark Johnson is raising his hand. I believe he was the one who had that and a second question. I'm going to go ahead and read off the second question, which was about state surplus. And Kimberly, you are here, and I'm just going to kind of pass it over to you. Mark, do you have any additional information you want to provide, or Kimberly, if you want to jump in?
Hey, Mark. What I would say, and I don't know the exact years, but the South Carolina has had a surplus for many, many years. For the last, I believe, and I need to look this up, but I will get back to you. But yes, we have had a
Yeah,
surplus.
yeah,
Um,
I'm on now. I'm sorry.
okay.
So, oh, good. First of all, I want to thank everybody, advocates around the South Carolina for doing what you've been doing over the years. Sometimes for every rock you push up a hill, you tend to gain two more. Um, and it's been particularly tough, I think, since probably 2020. It seems like there were opportunities, and all of a sudden, seems like opportunities start narrowing. A lot of good work on employment and some good work, like you said, on the 504 stuff. So what I mean by a different strategy, I think Ali said for 4 years, y'all been telling stories and been putting out the 100,000 versus 50,000. You've been, um, and so from a different strategy, what I'm talking about is, um, so when y'all ask for money to, like most states, every fall is the budget hearings. And so in some ways, the budget is already decided by the time the session starts. I mean, there's some fine tuning here and there, but the question is, what is the specific ask? Is it eliminate, as long as there's the economy's good? Is it 20% of the budget? I mean, 20% of the reduction on the waiting list every year for 5 years. And and to follow up, the what is the specific ask is, are other civil rights groups doing more than just lip service support? Are they, like Kimberly, if you had this sign on letter, we're asking for, you know, 20% reduction in the waiting list, which is rather significant size waiting list, um, over the next whatever period of years, 5 years until it's done. And we'd like you to sign on this letter. So that stirs the pot a little different than the
Sure.
tell the powerful stories, which are powerful. Um, and then the other things, back to your point, and you'll get back to me, is, man, Georgia's infamous for the same thing, is, get surplus and give reduction in taxes to people or something. Or in this state, it's neglect the roads and now get a surplus and finally fill in the potholes. And so it's obvious what's going on. And as we move toward this election year, what is the potential of the network's platform expanding to have more specific ask? I
Yeah,
put
so Yeah, so I will tell you what our ask is around home and community-based services. So it is to invest in home and community-based services so that people are getting out of institutions and they don't have to go to institutions. So we're wanting to use that funding with Medicaid. That funding would go towards providing more services in the community. And so that is one of our asks. And then also reducing the waiting list. Right now, South Carolina has a 7-year waiting list on some of our waivers, and so we are requesting that we do reduce the waiting list. And we are going to go sit down with the director of HHS soon to talk about that number. So we will definitely have that shared throughout our social network, but also emails to share it out with you all. But to answer your question, I did look it up. So since 2008, we've had a surplus, and this year we're estimating a pretty significant surplus. And so what we're going to be doing this year that looks a little bit differently is we are meeting with Department of Health and Human Services to look at the return of investment of community support. So we know there's going to be a huge return of investment. So we're wanting to show that a little bit more clear for each person. And so that will also be the major ask at Advocacy Day. But there is a surplus estimate for this fiscal year of $2.7 billion. So while they're increasing on several different areas for Medicaid, we also think that that number could even be increased more. And so those are all up for discussions. But at least right now, South Carolina is requesting more funding for home and community-based services so that people do not have to be put into institutions. And sometimes those services are very difficult to advocate for because they're sometimes non-existent. And so that is something that if you need an advocacy organization, feel free to contact Able South Carolina, Family Connections of South Carolina, Disability Rights South Carolina, and we can definitely help spread the word.
Thank you. And we've got two more questions here. The next one is about the bathroom privacy bill, asking how exactly will the state enforce that bill without violating other civil rights were it to pass in its current form?
We're very we're very cautious. We're very nervous about that as well. We've got the same concerns, and I think it would really be up to the schools to enforce it. And I think uh, I don't think it would be heavily enforced, with some exceptions of some schools in the state. But that's a great question to ask. It is definitely a privacy issue, but I will tell you this too, guys. Like a lot of times, the bathrooms aren't even accessible in these schools. They may be brand new buildings and they're not accessible. And so, what we really recommend is, individual bathrooms every throughout the schools so that people can easily have the space that they need to be able to change and use the restroom. They're currently using the teachers' bathrooms at a lot of schools to accommodate students with disabilities. And so that may not be an issue if we did have more unisex bathrooms, but that is something that lawmakers are also pushing back on. But it does work. The unisex bathrooms do work when they're single, and it really is a great accommodation for people with disabilities, but also families.
All righty. And then those are all of our written in questions. We do have a hand raised in our audience from Robin. Robin, I believe you've been prompted to unmute. You can ask your question.
I actually don't have a question. I didn't mean to raise my hand. So I
Oh,
don't know if you can hear me, but I'm enjoying listening to
all
all the
righty.
discussion.
Well,
So
thank you.
great.
Thank you so much for the participation. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Before we move on, if we could advance to the next slide, please. So we are about to dive into the second half of our presentation today. And I just wanted to take a second to first thank you so much to our speakers for going through all that very technical information, answering those questions. If you happen to think of any other questions during the second half of today's presentation, feel free to send it to us through the Q&A feature or use the chat. We will address them again. But we are now going to transition away from discussing current issues impacting people with disabilities and into talking about what it takes to get your information, the way that these issues are impacting you in front of your lawmaker. So before we do that, just a couple of big deep breaths in and out. We're going to take about a minute here to relax, calm down. Maybe if you're like me, you might need to do some like finger wiggles or moving around the room a bit. Big deep breath in, big deep breath out, and just know that this next session is really just going to be telling you about how best to communicate with your lawmaker in the most effective way possible. When we get to the end of this part of the presentation, we will open it back up to question and answer. Those question and answer, it can be related to the issues that we've discussed. It can be related to this training on how best to communicate with your lawmaker. We're really quite open book here at Able, South Carolina. We want to make sure that you leave today's conversation feeling confident and knowledgeable about the issue areas impacting people with disabilities and how you can support others. So without further ado, again, one big breath in, one big breath out. Let's move on into our disabled and allies training.
Hello, everyone. As a reminder, I'm Allie Springate, and I'm going to be leading this training this evening. So let's go on to the next slide. So in the chat, let's just take a moment for reflection, and I'd love to read some responses from you all. And I have my chat monitors ready to share if you would like us to share. But tell us about any experience that you have, positive or negative, talking to an elected official or lawmaker. I'd love to hear some of your responses, or love to read some of your responses. We'll keep it to chat for the sake of time. And as I proceed through the next few slides, just feel free to share that information. Next slide, please. What is advocacy? We've touched on this earlier in the presentation, but as a recap, advocacy is speaking up or communicating for yourself and others. Advocacy is asking for change. Advocacy is sharing lived experiences, wants, and needs related to the issue that you are advocating for. Next slide, please. Often when folks advocate as an individual, they might tell their personal story, talk about their personal experiences to a lawmaker. They might make a phone call to lawmakers, send an email or write a letter or a postcard. They might attend a hearing or attend a meeting. And we're here to help you with that. And that's specifically what you can email me for. I have my email at the end of this training, or really anyone at ABLE. We can come alongside you and support you and help provide some informational support, educational support, or person-to-person support when it comes to speaking with your lawmaker. That's what we're here to do. Next slide, please. Often when advocating with an organization, folks might join coalitions such as the South Carolina Access and Independence Network. That is the planning coalition for our annual Advocacy Day for Access and Independence. Working with other organizations with a common goal increases the power and resources that you have towards an advocacy project. Advocating with an organization often looks like creating awareness, participating in media campaigns. So since organizations use resources like social media to reach, educate, and empower more individuals to advocate, joining in a campaign like that and helping to share the information put out by these organizations is advocacy with an organization. It's always helpful, no matter what kind of advocacy you do, but particularly with an organization, it's really helpful to use data to help with your advocacy. So individuals you hear from may have common threads to their experiences. So for example, the data that you gather from other people with common experiences can help organizations find root causes so issues can be addressed more efficiently. So for example, participating in a survey really helps to gather this kind of information, especially at the beginning when people are trying to get an understanding of who's affected by what issue and where's some common ground so we can kind of develop a very firm argument or firm talking points, solid talking points to speak with lawmakers about. Data can really help find issues that are the most important for those that you're serving. And that's if you work at an organization or volunteer or participate in some kind of advocacy with an organization. Data is extremely helpful when speaking to lawmakers and adds more validity to your words. And you'll even find the more familiar that you get with speaking with different lawmakers, sometimes they speak, depending on who you're talking to, they might speak a different language, quote unquote. So for instance, you might be talking with a representative who really values numbers and being able to see, okay, how many people are affected by this issue versus other issues or other people with different types of barriers. Or money, how much will this cost? Things like that. Some people really put more value in hearing a personal experience, but it's okay if you don't know all of that information. It really is just more helpful to know that there's such a broad, there are many ways to communicate information to lawmakers. And over time, you might familiarize yourself with each one individually, the more that you participate in advocacy. So let's go on to the next slide. So let's talk about talking with legislators specifically. Who exactly is a legislator or lawmaker? You can kind of use those terms interchangeably. Legislators or lawmakers are people who make laws, vote on budgets, and decide what programs get funded. And on this slide, you see an image of 5 people of different genders and ethnicities, and they're dressed in business professional clothing. And so it's to indicate to you that they might be people in political spaces, making some law-related decisions. Let's go on to the next slide. A legislator or lawmaker is also a member of your community, a neighbor, a person just like you. They are regular people in a role, and they are there. Their entire purpose is to listen to their constituents, listen to their communities, receive information and feedback from their communities so that it can help them make informed policy decisions. And so you are a very critical part of the policy making, the decision making process. Let's go on to the next slide. So some types of legislators include a state representative, state senator, and members of Congress. And remember that legislators work for you, and they want to hear from people who live in their district. And it can seem pretty intimidating because lawmakers, while they're intended to be very accessible and easily reached, sometimes it's just not that way. And there are different access barriers that over the years we've had to advocate for better access. And so because of their power and influence that they have and where they work in these very intimidating looking buildings, it can be pretty intimidating to talk to a legislator. So it's always good to remind yourself, they work for me and they want to hear what I have to say. And frankly, they have to hear what I have to say. And that's the beauty of being a legislator. Let's go on to the next slide. How do I find out who my legislators are? We can help with this process. You also can use a tool on the South Carolina State House website. It's www.scstatehouse.gov, and we have the link on this PowerPoint. You'll also get all of these slides following the presentation later this week. But this is a really good site for just plugging in your address to see who your representatives are, who your legislators are, so that you can begin reaching out to them if you haven't already. Let's go on to the next slide. Why should you communicate with your legislator? Why is it important? Laws affect your daily life, and that's in many different contexts: employment, healthcare, transportation, education, housing. It's literally every part of your life. Decisions are made without lived experience of disability and access needs, and that's not okay. We, and especially in the disability community, need to be at the front of these initiatives and front of advocacy and leading advocacy efforts and communicating with our legislators, because it's our lives these policies are being formed from. And we're being affected directly by these policies. So it's very important that we're giving that feedback to the lawmakers. So you and your story can change minds. That's why it's also important to communicate with your legislator. Your story very much matters. Supporters can help amplify, so make bigger, disabled people's voices and speak from their experiences as well. And I'd love to hear any other reasons you can think of. Please answer in the chat. And I'd love to be able to name those as we go over the next few slides. Let's go on, please. Some common myths versus some facts. A common myth is that legislators don't listen to people. And I personally hear this a lot. Well, legislators don't have time for me. Legislators won't listen to people like me, or I can't make a difference. And that's usually some evidence of being intimidated or being overwhelmed by the process of communicating with lawmakers. Totally understandable. But in actuality, legislators track every call they get, every email they get, every meeting, and what's being said and communicated in those meetings. Personal stories are remembered and made note of, taken down, written down. Many laws change because people speak up and communicate. And I wanted to specify very specific laws that have passed because of people, everyday people in our state, people with disabilities and people without disabilities advocating for change. One of those is the Right to Parent Act, which is worth looking up. And if we have time, we can take some questions on it. Subminimum wage ending in South Carolina and joining other states who have gone before us and ended subminimum wage as well. And action that we take after Advocacy Day for access and independence and legislator visits that we have. This is how laws get changed. And we even mentioned earlier in the presentation the fact that South Carolina withdrew from the Section 504 lawsuit, the Texas v. Kennedy, is due to our advocacy and the advocacy of disabled folks in South Carolina. So we can make waves, we can make change, and it's something as simple as a phone call often. So really important to remember that there's no advocacy too small. Any communication with your legislator is a positive thing. Let's go on to the next slide. Ashley Manley, that's such a good point. We had everyone calling Alan Wilson's office. And I will just say, it is so helpful for people like me. I'm a very visual person, and I really depend on having like flashcards or talking points, something that I can look at to remember what I need to say, like a slide deck, like looking at these PowerPoint slides. And I love, and we do this as an organization, but I love when organizations put talking points or a script for people to call, because when you call, sometimes every word leaves your head, right? And so having talking points where you can refer to as you're talking to a legislator or leaving a message, or talking to a staff person, can be so beneficial. I'm just looking over the chat to make sure I'm not missing something else that I wanted to make note of. Susie Baxter, when people with disabilities who work or have credentials speak up, it demonstrates that people with disabilities are able and active in advocacy. That's so good. That's a good note to make. Ashley says, as a parent advocate, I make sure they see my face, and if I can manage it, I make sure they see my son. That way he's a real person to them. And that's powerful, because it is your son leading in that advocacy with you as support. It's amazing. As a reminder, you are not asking for a favor. You're asking for your civil rights. You're asking for fair access. You are helping lawmakers represent everyone and make decisions for all people. You're providing information so that lawmakers can serve you and the community as best they can. And you're an integral part, a very important part of that process. Next slide, please. Again, your story is powerful. Parts of a good advocacy story. First of all, who are you? What is the problem? What's the barrier that you're addressing? How does it affect your life? And what do you want to change? A really good example is from my friend and colleague, Dory Tempio. Many of you likely know Dory. And what she says is, I am Dory Tempio from Columbia, South Carolina, and I use a power wheelchair. My bus stop is not accessible, and because of that, I miss appointments. I would like to see accessible bus stops and transportation funded. Short, to the point, clear, direct. And often that's as simple and short as it needs to be. And you're effectively communicating with your legislator. Let's go on to the next slide. Preparing to communicate with a lawmaker. Before you contact them, it's helpful to know your discussion topics and points. It's helpful to know what you need to say. Practice your story, decide what you're asking from them, and sometimes it's helpful to write that out and have that in front of you. Your ask should be clear and simple. Not that it can't be long, but it's helpful to be very direct and focused so that things don't get confusing, especially if you're meeting with a legislator and things are being done verbally. But also a very specific ask is helpful as well. So for example, I'm asking you to support funding for accessible housing. Very clear and very direct. Let's go on to the next slide. Some ways to share your message can include sending an email, mailing a letter. You can always call, speak to a staff member, leave a message, talk directly to a legislator sometimes, attend a town hall or a hearing, meet in person or online, share written testimony. And a nice tip, if you're using, if you use the lawmaker's contact form on their website, that'll often get you the very best access and their direct contact information. Remember, you choose whichever advocacy type feels most comfortable and confident to you. Access matters, and you have the right to request accommodations to participate as well. Next slide, please. Some other reminders, like I've said before, short messages are perfectly okay. Really just showing your passion for change and being honest and transparent and real goes a lot further than you could ever imagine. Just be yourself. Stay on topic, bring notes if you need them, relax, take deep breaths, and just remind yourself that they're people and they're working for you. Often helps to kind of shift that perspective in your head that can often make us anxious. If they disagree, it's important to stay calm, repeat your main point, thank them for listening, and those things really go a long way when you're communicating not only with a lawmaker, but really with anybody. Let's go on to the next slide. After you advocate, kind of treat this like you would a job interview. When you do follow up, it's important to follow up. And when you do follow up, remember to say thank you, send a short email, keep notes for next time. I like to have a little paper trail. It not only helps me remember what we talked about, but I can also refer back to it later if they might have forgotten to get back with me, or I want to refer to my notes for continuing advocacy. Advocacy is ongoing and every conversation matters. Building relationships with legislators takes time. Partnerships really grow when you develop them. And that's just general advice, but especially when advocacy is concerned. Let's go on to the next slide. As a reminder as well, you are a leader. Your message matters, your story matters, and change starts with each of you. So another question for the chat. What is one issue that you care about and want to change? I'd love to hear what you all are currently focusing on in terms of advocacy, and we'll go on to the next slide while people are answering in the chat. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what Advocacy Day is. It's our upcoming annual event, but upcoming for this year. Advocacy Day for Access and Independence is an annual rally that we hold at the South Carolina State House, as well as on a virtual live stream. And this year, Advocacy Day is on April 14th, 2026. And every year we focus on issues that South Carolinians with disabilities care the most about. And this year we're going to focus all on inclusive community living. And that's going to include 4 categories: employment, transportation, housing, and healthcare. So let's go on to the next slide. Let me skip to the next slide real quick before, let me cover this real quick. The 2026 legislative session, just so you all are aware, began on January 13th of 2026. So stay tuned for email alerts and social media posts as we continue updating folks with these bills that are currently in review, and then also ways to get involved. And there's a really useful app on the screen called the South Carolina Legislature mobile app that makes it easier to keep up to date with what's happening at the State House. I did want to mention a few responses in the chat. And actually, Renata, you can go back to the question slide if you want. Thank you. Dory, current advocacy focus, healthcare, home and community-based services. Jasmine mentions housing in York County. Betty mentions fragrance-free public transportation. Susie mentions funding for SNAP, funding to provide medically tailored meals to people with disabilities. Love these answers. These are amazing. Oh, and Susie also said, above, my professional association encourages members to send emails and provide wording. However, many times their wording is overlooked disabilities. I always add wording about disabilities. I'm also communicating with my professional association to consider and include disabilities in their wording. That's amazing. That's a great example of advocacy in the everyday, in the work environment. That's amazing. Okay, and I believe, I want to make sure, do I transfer to you, Mary Alex? I think that's what's next.
Yeah, we'll ask for questions now, so feel free to use the chat or the question and answer feature. I do want to pass it to Kimberly real quick, who is going to provide some updated information and clarification on a question we had earlier about how much South Carolina is currently spending on home and community-based services.
Great. Thanks, Mary Alex. So currently, the budget request this year, this is the first time that there's been a line item for home and community-based services, probably within the last 10 years that I'm aware of. So this is really good because it's never been asked directly for home and community-based services. Usually it's clumped in with just state Medicaid dollars. But we did look at it's hard to predict, but because the state combines LTSS, state Medicaid, with home and community-based services. There is a percentage that is supposed to be going to home and community-based services, and that roughly is around 390 to 420 million per year in state. So with that request that will add to that. And I do know that there is 10 million of that home and community-based service request or that overall request will be going towards to lower the waiting list. So that was my update. So
Thank you.
thanks, everyone. And we'll be getting more information on this too. Everything will be released during Advocacy Day, and we will have the most current numbers that we can around the waivers, the waiver waiting list, and giving more information about how the waiver waiting list will go down. So thank you all.
Awesome. And we just a couple of other folks have said that they're advocating for housing in their various counties. Rebecca Pruitt says accessible exam rooms, which, yes, incredibly important and covered in some of our Section 504 updates. But then we had a question from Jesse. What are the main barriers to employment that we will be highlighting at Advocacy Day?
So I'll go ahead and answer this, and this is pay equity for people with disabilities. There are studies that show that people with disabilities get significantly less in pay, and especially the more marginalized you are. So women get paid less than men with disabilities. Uh, Black women with disabilities get paid even less, and so there's data around that. This is the first time we've ever had data around that, so that's somewhat exciting, but not the greatest news. We do know how to fix that. So we will be going over that, but also the unemployment rate for people with disabilities. We have the eighth highest unemployment rate for people with disabilities in the country. And so there's a lot of information around the fact that people can work. A lot of times people are told that they can't work, they can't go to school, and we show them that people can work. And so that we just got to really educate on the myths around employment. And a lot of the myths too within the disability community is that people will lose their coverage. Well, that's not necessarily true. You can work a certain amount of hours and still keep all of your benefits, which is great. Through the Ticket to Work program, there's some work incentives that you can receive if you do go back to work. But the bottom line is really employers. We've got to really work with employers to teach them about hiring practices for people with disabilities, reasonable accommodations. It's very easy to accommodate people with disabilities. As an employer of 86% of our staff of 70 have disabilities, our accommodation expense is very, very low, less than $3,000 a year. So we can do it. Other employers can absolutely do it. So those are the main issues that we're going to be looking at. Some of the recommendations will be uh, tax incentives for hiring people with disabilities. So employers would get a tax incentive very similar to on the federal level, because right now you can get actually a federal work credit, or not work credit, tax credit from the employer if you hire people with disabilities. So you just have to track that. And so we're going to try to mirror that same thing in South Carolina to see if that helps with the unemployment rate, along with a lot of education to employers.
Thank you. We've got lots of other great comments. Susie comments in the chat, making sure to mention registered dietitians when we do healthcare advocacy. Everybody's got to eat. And also mention when going to medical appointments, reminded about height adjustable exam tables, scales, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you all so much. Any other questions, guys, before we wrap things up this evening? Feel free to use the chat question and answer feature or raise your hand if there's anything else you'd like to discuss. If we can go to the next slide. So on screen here is just a reminder about how to connect with us. And as a reminder, we will be emailing all of you a copy of today's presentation as well as a link to this recorded and uploaded to YouTube. That will be later this week. So just be on the lookout for that. You can, next slide, please. And one more over. Skipping ahead of myself there. There we go. And on screen now are some ways that you can stay in touch with us. You can follow us at Able South Carolina on Facebook, Instagram, X, LinkedIn, as well as YouTube. And then we also have our phone number on screen, website, etc. And you can join our email list. We actually have an update that unfortunately I'm not catching until we are on this call right now. But to get our email list, if you go to our website and scroll to the bottom, there is a button that says join our email list. That is our brand new email list link that just went live last week. So we do have a new email system that we're using. However, if you've been getting emails from us in the past, don't worry, you're still on that list, so you don't have to do anything to update. But thank you guys so much for being here. We truly appreciate you. Again, we will send you copies of everything from today. And just kudos to our speakers for covering some of these topics, and for also speaking to the fact that we know we can't cover everything in the short time that we have with you every time we have these town halls. We know there is lots of information, lots of news, lots of media, lots of content, lots of things to cover that impact not only disability, but the many communities that we are also a part of as people with disabilities. You know, people with disabilities being the largest marginalized group in the United States, representing people of many marginalizations. So thank you all so much for being here and listening and tuning in. If you have any questions about other groups that you can engage with that might cover some disability adjacent topics, feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to give you some recommendations. Otherwise, if we can go to the last slide, please. I'm going to ask Kimberly to pop back on one last time and let everyone know about our crisis fundraising campaign, and then we will wrap it up this evening.
Great. And I will say this, that advocacy is not typically funded within organizations like ours. So if you want to contribute to us, that would be fantastic. We did have a little loss this year due to some of the budget cuts on the national level. But so we're trying to recoup that so that we can continue fighting here in South Carolina. So feel free. If you also want to donate in-kind donations or even help with volunteering, you can also reach out to us.
Thank you. And I put in the chat there, our official fundraising website is allable-sc.org. So if you're able to make some type of a contribution, we would sincerely appreciate it. Otherwise, please do continue to like, view, share, comment on our content on social media, engage with our emails, forward to a friend information that we supply that you think is relevant, and stay in touch. We appreciate you being here. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us.